Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into an absolutely monumental moment in British civil rights history. It's a story of how a local Caribbean restaurant in Notting Hill literally became the epicenter of a struggle that changed the country's legal landscape forever. And as you'll see, the ripples of what went down 50 years ago, we're still feeling them today.
In 1971, His Honor Judge Edward Clark, QC, wrapped up a grueling trial with a pretty profound statement, noting, and I quote, "evidence of racial hatred on both sides." Why does this matter? Well, this was actually the very first judicial acknowledgement of racial prejudice within the Metropolitan Police. It was a total shock to the system, and it perfectly sets the stage for everything we're about to unpack.
But to really understand how we got to that groundbreaking admission in a British courtroom, we have to start by asking ourselves a fundamental question. Who gets to control community spaces? It's really a question about belonging and who actually had authority in 1970s London.
Section 1. The hostile environment. Let's take a look at how post-war Caribbean migration met a rapidly changing and often deeply unwelcoming urban landscape in Britain.
So, navigating this environment meant coming face-to-face with the 1824 Vagrancy Act. You've probably heard this referred to as the Sus Laws. Basically, this outdated legislation gave police the power to stop, search, and arrest anyone they simply suspected of loitering with intent to commit a crime. You can imagine how that went. This pervasive over-policing actually fueled the rise of something called political blackness. Now, this wasn't just about a single ethnicity. It became this powerful unifying identity forged by different communities who were all sharing that common experience of colonial oppression and systemic discrimination in Britain.
Section 2. Defending the mangrove. Let's head to the physical epicenter of this conflict, where a community fought back to protect their safe havens. The escalation around Frank Critchlow's mangrove restaurant was just relentless. The mangrove wasn't just a place to grab a bite to eat, it was an absolute sanctuary for the local Trinidadian community. We're talking a hub where intellectuals, activists, and everyday folks gathered. But over just 18 months, police raided the restaurant 12 separate times. 12! And they never found any evidence of illegal activity. So, after exhausting all the official channels, like filing complaints with the Race Relations Board, the community finally said, enough is enough. On August 9, 1970, 150 people took to the streets in protest. When you look at the historical records from the National Archives, you see two starkly opposing views of that fateful August march. On one hand, local police anticipated violence. They viewed the mangrove as a den of iniquity and were actively gathering surveillance. On the flip side, the Action Group for the Defense of the Mangrove felt they were simply demanding an end to unjustified harassment. They were just claiming their right to exist safely as black citizens of London. And when the march actually happened, well, those two opposing perspectives violently collided.
Section 3. The historic trial. The massive fallout from that August protest led directly to the Old Bailey, which is Britain's central criminal court.
One of the defendants, Darcus Howe, hit the nail on the head regarding the incredibly high stakes of this trial. He said, "If they put me in prison, they do not take away my liberty, but reduce the little liberty I have." Wow. The defendants here didn't just passively accept their time in court. Instead, they flipped the script. They used the courtroom as a national platform to challenge systemic prejudice and really shine a light on their daily lived experiences.
And their legal strategy? Completely unprecedented. So you have 9 activists facing serious charges for causing a riot. But Darcus Howe and Althea Jones-LeCoyne chose to represent themselves. They even demanded an all-black jury, citing the Magna Carta to argue for their right to a trial by their peers. This turned into a marathon, 55-day trial. And the result? An acquittal of all 9 defendants on the most serious riot charges. It was a massive victory that literally shook the British justice system to its core.
Section 4. The Carnival Battleground. The fight for community space and cultural expression didn't end in court. It spilled right back out into the streets during the Notting Hill Carnival.
You see, the carnival was always about so much more than just a party. When authorities tried to ban the event or push it into a stadium, the Carnival Development Committee stepped up. They actively fought back, handing out flyers that framed the carnival as a vibrant and absolutely necessary defense of West Indian culture in Britain. It was a bold assertion of their right to occupy public space.
Sadly, this cultural celebration clashed violently with the state in 1976, resulting in some really severe street disturbances. Community leaders had actually warned that unrest was brewing, but authorities responded with a massive show of force. For a lot of locals, this felt like a direct provocation to a generation of youth who were already carrying the heavy burdens of unemployment and societal alienation.
Just to put this into perspective, the police presence that year surged exponentially, jumping from just 200 officers to a staggering 1,600. So yeah, the resulting clashes were intense. In the aftermath, the press eagerly used images from these clashes to construct a lasting, highly racialized stereotype of young black men as inherently criminal. But it also sparked massive cultural responses. The events inspired songs by punk bands like The Clash and reggae groups like Oswald, weaving this spirit of resistance deeply into London's cultural DNA.
Section 5. The Enduring Legacy. So, how does this 50-year-old history impact the modern landscape of British society and policing?
Well, the activism of the Mangrove Nine and the community defenders of Notting Hill was incredibly influential. It helped build broad support for the 1976 Race Relations Act, expanding anti-discrimination laws. Crucially, it forced society to look in the mirror and confront institutional blind spots, biases that wouldn't actually be formally recognized at an institutional level until the McPherson Report in 1999. Ultimately, the Mangrove Nine left behind a legacy of resistance that defined a generation and laid the groundwork for the debates over policing tactics we're still having today.
And speaking of those debates, the echoes of those 1824 sus laws, they are definitely still relevant. A 2018 report highlighted something pretty shocking. Even though black individuals made up only about 15% of London's population, they accounted for 43% of all people stopped and searched by police in the capital. That's a huge disparity.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. Half a century after Frank Critchlow, Darcus Howe, and the rest of the Mangrove Nine took a defiant stand for their civil rights and their community space, how much of that original system really remains intact today? It's something we all need to think about. Thanks for joining me to unpack this incredible piece of history.